Socrates is widely considered to be the founder of Western philosophy, with his promotion of virtue, humility, courage, self-examination, and rigorous discussion influencing subsequent great thinkers. Most of us recall Socrates as a teacher who, barefoot and dressed in dirty garments, went around spreading his radical ideas, which resulted in his execution by the tyrannical Athenian government. However, before these events, Socrates served the very state that wronged him, as a soldier in the Athenian army during the Peloponnesian War. Through the historian Thucydides' detailed account of the war, and through Socrates' reactions to his involvement, as seen in several of Plato's works, we get an idea of the hardships Socrates and his fellow comrades underwent, and how Socrates' conduct in the war can best illustrate his philosophy to its very core. The Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BC, pitted oligarchic Sparta against democratic Athens along with their respective allies over hegemony of the Greek world. Both sides struggled to gain the upper hand. Sparta, through its austere military tradition, sported a competent professional army, while Athens, through its maritime trade prowess, possessed skilled sailors and an impressive navy. Although Sparta and its allies emerged victorious in the end, both suffered greatly and would never again regain their former prestige. Socrates fought in 3 brutal campaigns in the early stages of this conflict. As a citizen of Athens, he, then in his mid-30s, was required to fight in the army as a hoplite, the ancient Greek equivalent of a militiaman. The first of these engagements occurred outside Potidaea, a city in northern Greece once loyal to Athens, but was on the fringe of revolt due to Spartan encouragement and harsh Athenian demands. Both Athens and Sparta's predominant ally, Corinth, each sent several thousand hoplites to secure the city, and the 2 armies met outside its walls to battle. In the ensuing fight, the Corinthians and Potidaeans routed after losing 300 men, and dashed towards the safety behind the city's walls. The Athenians, having lost half as many men, then laid siege to the city, which lasted over a year, cutting it off from the sea. Under threat of starvation, the city capitulated. Although the Athenians won, the siege was costly financially, and both the defenders and attackers suffered severe privations. The unpopularity of this Pyrrhic victory failed to provide the Athenians any morale boost. Socrates' bravery and resilience at Potidaea would come to characterize his personality. Alcibiades, an aristocratic friend of Socrates who would later become a prominent statesman and general, received a bad wound which left him vulnerable on the ground in front of advancing enemies. Socrates saved his life by guarding him and refusing to leave his side, recovering both him and also his armor, which was likely a prized target for the enemy forces. In Plato's Symposium, Alcibiades recounts how Socrates had unfathomable endurance against cold and hunger, and how despite the wretched conditions the Athenians were in, with dwindling supplies, camped outside at mercy to the elements far from home, Socrates bore his fate with unusual serenity. His notable eccentricity also stirred through the ranks of the men. Alcibiades tells that Socrates, once completely lost in thought, stood outside in one spot for 24 hours straight, to the mockery and amusement of his bewildered fellow soldiers. Amidst the horrid conditions at Potidaea, Socrates witnessed many of his friends die from wounds, hunger, and disease outbreak, which probably left a permanent imprint on his psyche and tested his convictions. His furlough back home was short-lived, because several years later he was called to fight again, with his next battle resulting in a total catastrophe. The Battle of Delium occurred just northwest of Athens, close to Thebes. The Athenians wanted to score a victory closer to their homeland against the Boeotians, another of Sparta's powerful allies. The campaign was led by 2 Athenian generals, but they failed to coordinate with each other, and when one arrived long before the other, the general decided to return back to Athens after fortifying a nearby temple with a small garrison. The Boeotian army, taking advantage of the Athenians' disorganization, drew up to confront the retreating Athenians, and the 2 sides formed up for battle. The Athenians deployed their troops in a standard uniform line, while the Boeotians experimented with a strong right wing but a weak left wing, but which had a cavalry reserve force behind it. The Athenian right crushed the Boeotian left initially, but in the confusion the Athenians began attacking their own troops. This is the first recorded case of friendly fire, and was not an uncommon occurrence due to both sides sporting similar attire and neither side having a sigil or flag. To make matters worse, the reserve Boeotian cavalry swept in and destroyed the Athenian right. Meanwhile, the strong Boeotian right wing, as expected, destroyed the Athenian left, and when the Athenian center saw that both sides were defeated, turned and ran. During this rout, many Athenians were killed, but most managed to reach the safety of the fortified temple. The Boeotians, upon reaching the temple, demanded that the Athenians leave due to their infringing upon sacred land, but the Athenians refused to budge. In response, the Boeotians brought up a strange siege device that Thucydides describes to be a kind of flamethrower, with an iron tube connected to a bellows on one side, and on the other a cauldron underneath filled with coal, sulfur, and pitch. The wooden ramparts stood no chance, and after several hundred Athenians were killed, they were allowed to escape in humiliation. Delium was probably the bloodiest hoplite battle of the Peloponnesian War, and with this taking place so close to Athens, must have produced a deep sense of both fear and degradation in the hearts of the Athenian populace. Among the soldiers present during this calamity was Socrates. In Plato's Symposium, Alcibiades, this time on horseback and recovered from his wound, recounts that when many Athenians were retreating in panic, Socrates stood facing the enemy, with his eyes darting back and forth, searching both for friend and foe, like an animal ready to spring into action. Alcibiades says in quote, "He made it plain to everyone, even at a great distance, that if one touches this real man, he will defend himself vigorously. Consequently, he went away safely, both he and his comrade, for when you behave in war as he did, then they just about do not even touch you. Instead, they pursue those who turn in headlong flight." The comrade mentioned was Laches, an Athenian general who later reminisced, "He was my companion in the retreat from Delium, and I could tell you that, if others had only been like him, the honor of our country would have been upheld, and the great defeat would never have occurred." Laches credits Socrates for saving his life, getting him out of the danger through his steadfast and calm demeanor. After experiencing extreme hunger, cold, disease, and witnessing many of his comrades slain, Socrates was shortly after sent to another confrontation, which turned into yet another disaster for the Athenians, but which he nevertheless maintained his composure. In the northernmost shore of Greece, above Potidaea, there was another Athenian colony called Amphipolis that was besieged by the Spartans under the command of the admired general Brasidas. Offering favorable terms, Brasidas managed to convince the Amphipolians to surrender unharmed, to the dismay of the small Athenian garrison under General Eucles, hell-bent on maintaining hold of the colony. Eucles had earlier sent help for the historian Thucydides, who at this time was serving as a general, but he failed to come with reinforcements in time, arriving the same day the city surrendered. He was subsequently tried and exiled, although he vigorously maintained that he could not have arrived sooner. After a short-lived armistice, the hawkish and unpopular Athenian general Cleon sailed an army to bring the region back under Athenian control. The two armies faced each other outside of Amphipolis, but with the Spartans having a slight edge in numbers, and sensing an imminent attack, Cleon decided to retreat until reinforcements could arrive. However, this retreat was badly organized, and sensing this, the Spartans rushed in, and what followed was a massacre. The Athenians lost around 600 men, including Cleon, while the Spartans only lost 8. However, one of those 8 included Brasidas. Accounts only mention that Socrates was present, with no specifics involving his conduct. However, we can confidently conclude that he remained dignified among this catastrophe, doing what he could to help his brethren. Given such a one-sided massacre at Amphipolis must have made a deep impression on Socrates, demonstrating the importance of competent leaders and how mistakes rooted in haughtiness could prove catastrophic. Socrates returned to Athens, never to leave again. In fact, the only time he ever did leave Athens was on these military campaigns. His welcome back home might not have been as distinguished as one today might expect. It's important to understand that although he is a veteran, so is virtually every other citizen, as was the nature of ancient Greek warfare. In our modern world, only a small fraction of citizens are soldiers, and are usually volunteers, therefore holding a more honorable position in society. Although he proved to be courageous in battle, he was also mocked by his fellow soldiers for his peculiarities, rooted also in jealousy of his endurance. When he saved Alcibiades' life, the soldiers flocked towards Alcibiades because of his high position in Athenian society, bestowing medal and honorifics on him, which emphasizes that although a democracy, Athens was still very much defined by class structure. Many enthusiasts wonder why Socrates went to war without complaint, yet at the same time was so critical of the Athenian state and its greed for power. Socrates was not a pacifist that was against war. In fact, in Plato's Republic, Socrates envisions the perfect city that's protected by professional soldiers known as guardians, who are fierce in war but gentle at home. The rulers of this perfect state are chosen from the guardian class, and must be gifted not only in battle, but also in intellect and philosophy. Thus, the ruling class would be composed of warrior philosophers, emphasizing that Socrates believed that capable fighting men were just as important as philosophers. However, Socrates was definitely against this war, viewing the expeditions as expressions of Athenian greed. It's not like he was defending Athens, as these 3 battles occurred away from home, and in the case of Potidæa and Amphipolis, trying to maintain allies that no longer wanted to be under Athens' thumb. However, although he disagreed with this conflict, Socrates was more interested in how he as an individual reacted to this adverse predicament, whether he acted heroically and did all he could for his comrades, or whether he acted selfishly and cowardly. He didn't try to stop Athens in its avarice, but instead strove for virtue and incited those around him to follow an example. Although he did not come undone by war, Socrates recognized that war trauma can break a man, and that a just society must strive to care for its soldiers. By the Socratic method of self-examination through discussion, one can engender self-control and understanding, and can rehabilitate himself back to civilian life. Socrates didn't exhibit any signs of what we might call PTSD today, and it is said that the very hour after he returned from Potidæa, he went back to his old habits of visiting the gymnasium and seeing old friends. However, when friends asked him about the war, Socrates was terse and almost dismissive, like veterans are so often like when asked to mentally relive horrible events. However, he soon warmed up, answering all questions and recounting his ordeals in battle. Willingness to share and rationalize experiences with friends and loved ones can prove therapeutic to veterans, and probably kept Socrates in a relatively untroubled mentality while transitioning to civilian life. Despite his acquiescence to be sent to war, Socrates was described by Plato as a gadfly to Athens, pestering it to become virtuous and steer from greed and corruption. However, Socrates was humble, believing himself possessing no great intellect. "I know that I know nothing," he famously pronounced. Yet when his friend asked the oracle at Delphi if there were anybody wiser than Socrates, the oracle proclaimed that there were none. Perplexed, Socrates began questioning those high in society, such as statesmen and artisans, and realized that while they thought they were wise, they were in fact not. So Socrates realized that his acknowledgement that he himself were not wise paradoxically made him wise. Many powerful people were insulted by Socrates, and he was eventually arrested both for corrupting the minds of the youth through his teachings and through impiety, refusing to heed to the state's interpretations of the gods. During his trial, Socrates brought up his military service and reminded the jury that he remained brave and honorable in battle, and asked them why he should act any different at home in defense against these accusers. Socrates believed that all philosophy is in essence training for death. At war he did not fear death, and therefore he would not refute his philosophy out of the threat of death. In battle he remained obedient to the commanders elected by the city, entrusting the paramountcy of the state, and at home he remained obedient to the gods. Socrates not only publicly reminisced about his military service, but also compared himself to the superheroes of the day, Achilles and Ajax of the epic poem The Iliad. Both honorably served the army, being the best warriors among Agamemnon's soldiers. And both suffer through injustice as Socrates did, but unlike Socrates, both become undone by rage, while Socrates maintained his composure. When asked how Socrates believed he should be punished, he suggested comically that the government should offer him wage and free dinners for the rest of his life for serving as Athens' benefactor. Socrates was sentenced to death for his unabashed teachings, but nevertheless accepted his fate despite the ease by which his friends could have bribed the guards to set him free. Socrates refused to escape because he didn't want others to think he was afraid of death, because he agreed to Athens and its laws when he chose to live there, and also if he escaped his friends would fall under suspicions of the authorities. Socrates remained good-tempered and believed that he would remain alive in Athenian conscience, and viewed Hades, the ancient Greek version of the underworld, as a place where he could continue his philosophy and visit with past heroes. Socrates was right in that he remains alive not only in Athenian conscience, but much of the world today, remembered for his virtuous life which he pursued and taught in the face of mockery and death, and believed that the unexamined life is not worth living.